Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Another episode of Shop Talk today. It's officially that part of the year where we're in the middle of March up here in the Northeast, where I don't know how many more freezing nights we're going to get, and the temperature in the shop has stayed above freezing for quite some time. So it's another effort to get the car ready for this race season, first event in 3 weeks. We need to flush the cooling system on this car and get all of the antifreeze out of the car so we can add water and our water additive, which is the coolant required for a lot of organizations. Once you get into anything that is competitive, time trials, wheel-to-wheel racing, anything like that, they really push you to get away from your glycol ingredient antifreeze in the car. You ever been at a racetrack and someone spills coolant on the track and you and your friends now get to sit there for an hour while they try to clean it up? It's not a good day. So a lot of organizations are switching over to you can only run water with a water additive. If you're also a person like me though who just so happens to live in the armpit of the East, Buffalo or any of the northern states, you cannot leave your water and your solution in the car over winter or it will freeze. So at the end of every year, I have to add antifreeze back in the car for storage. And in the beginning of the year, we flush it out to get ready for the track. So pretty easy job. Just get ready to make a mess. Unfortunately, we've got to jack the car up in the air. I've got to remove the underskirts. We'll get rid of the drain plug in the radiator. And then you need to come in here and remove your thermostat housing and your thermostat in the car. You'll then flush the coolant out of the system, and then you'll put what you would like to run back in afterwards. So let's get the car up in the air. Let's start draining what's currently in the car, and we'll go through a simple process, but a couple little nuances to it, a couple little tricks that I use that make it a lot easier, especially depending on the type of tools and what you're using. It kind of helps a little bit. So let's get started. Alright guys, so as you can see, I removed all of my my radiator splash guard as well as my engine skid plate, transmission skid plate, just because we're going to be removing the thermostat housing up there and the radiator drain plug down here, so I just don't want to get fluid trapped in all the trays, get it going in places that I don't want to do it. Just get everything out of the way so it drips straight down. Up next, we're going to take the radiator drain plug off. Then we're going to go up top. We're also going to remove the radiator cap on top, so that way we don't have to worry about air getting trapped in the system. The air can go out the top while the fluid goes out the bottom. So we're going to do that now, and then we'll be right back. Alright guys, so down here is your thermostat housing on my car, and I got the bolts taken out, so we're going to pull this pipe off, and all of the coolant that the thermostat is currently keeping in the system is going to come out. Alright, and then you will need to take the thermostat in there and remove it. Like so. Set it aside for the process. And now you have a ton of fluid under the car that just kind of needs to drain out. So let it sit for a little while, and then we're going to start flushing the car. Alright guys, so now it's time to flush your system once you let most of the fluid drain out. And for this step, I'm just going to use a traditional garden hose down the filler. It's going to clean out the engine. Then I'm going to connect the thermostat connector back to the engine block with the thermostat removed. That will flush out all the coolant that's in the heater core, inside the cabin, and all that stuff as well. So just get garden hose down the coolant fill. And you want to flush it until all your color's out. You should start flushing clear water. So my coolant is FL22 Mazda coolant that I run antifreeze in the wintertime, so it is a green color. So I want to flush all of this until no more green comes out. Most of my color coming out, so then I'm going to put these screws back in the thermostat housing, and then we're going to fill it, and that's going to flush my heater core for me. Alright guys, once you use the hose and you flush everything until all your color's gone, you're just getting straight water out of the car. As you can see here, I disconnected. This is the heater core hose itself. I started flushing through there, taking the cap off, put the radiator plug back in, just changing up where I'm putting the water, where I'm flushing the water. That way you make sure you get into all different nooks and crannies. And then I eventually did see that the heater core fluid did come out of there, as well as a lot of the green fluid came out the top. So we are 100% flushed of all the old coolant. Now the issue that you have is that I used a garden hose. I do have a RO filter on my hose out here to get rid of the hard water and to pretty much purify the water. Now it's not 100% perfect, and you might not have one of these at home. So the next step is we have to disconnect everything again and drain all of the water out of the system. After that, then we're going to flush it again with 10 gallons of distilled water I bought from the store. That's going to make sure that no hard water, no water with minerals is left in the car. You want distilled water in the car. Otherwise, you'll get the water itself. If it sits in there, if it sits in the pocket, it'll start to rust. It'll start to corrode, oxidize inside your system. You know, but also if you're someone like me who flushes your car once a year, once every 6 months, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're going to do it right. When you're done with this step, use distilled water. So I'm going to take all my drains back off, drain as much as everything that's in the system right now, and then we're going to redo this with distilled water. Now we got our fancy grocery store water. And actually, believe it or not, this stuff isn't that bad. I think I paid 75 cents a gallon for it. So just start pouring it into parts of the engine. Get all the other water out. Remember, it's water. It's cheap. Use it liberally. so now that we are done flushing the car with the hose and then flushing the car with distilled water, it's time to button everything back up so you can be ready to add your coolant to the car that you're going to use for the track. So first things first, you're going to throw your thermostat back in, connect your thermostat housing. I'm going to put my heater core pipe back on. I'm going to put the drain plug back in the radiator, and then we're going to lower the car back down and start filling it up. Alright guys, so the car is back together. The thermostat hose and the thermostat are back installed on the back of the water pump. My heater core hose is connected. The drain plug is back in the radiator. So now it is time to fill the system. And I use one of these funnel kits that I have found works pretty decently for these cars. I haven't gone and got, some people, you know, use a vacuum bleeder. You can get vacuum bleeders pretty cheap from Harbor Freight. Some people say that they work great. I've actually never used one. So what I've always done is you take the adapter that's needed for your car with some rubber on it, and you put that in your radiator fill. You get the associated clamp for your car and you put it on there and make sure it goes on all the way tight. Then you put the funnel on. After that, you get whatever coolant you're going to be using. I've always used the Maxima Kool-Aid. I get the ready-to-use bottles because I don't feel like mixing it, and you fill it in the funnel. And you fill it in the funnel until the funnel itself starts to hold some of the fluid, which for this car I believe is just over 6 liters, so it does take a while. This stuff's got a good smell to it too. So now you can see the air is coming through as the fluid is going through. So I add a jug at a time, and we'll go through and keep adding them until it sits there. Alright, so now you can see most of our air bubbles have come out and there's fluid left in the container. So I'm going to top it off a little bit more, and what we're going to do here is turn the car on with the funnel connected so we get everything up to operating temperature, and that will open the thermostat, which will then allow a lot of this coolant to circulate into the heater core, circulate into the engine, into the radiator, and make sure that all the air comes out of the car. So I'm going to put a little bit more coolant in there, and then we're going to start the car and let it idle up to temp. You can see that there's bubbles and fluid, well, bubbles coming up through the fluid into the reservoir. That is air in your system. Additionally, what I like to do is you come, and on a car lift it's really easy, but you jack up the front of the car. So that way, this fluid reservoir is not only your highest point, but any air bubbles in the back of the engine will flow and help kind of dislodge them a little bit. So I always jack up the front of the car when I do this, and that helps get the air out of the system really well. So we're gonna let this idle for a while, get everything up to temp, and then we're gonna go through. Mazda has a procedure for filling the car. You get in the car, you rev the engine a couple times, different RPM, get the water pump working, really pushing fluid through there, creating water turbulence, and really push that air out of the system. So once we're up to temp, and I know that my thermostat is open at about 160, 165 degrees, we'll start that procedure. Alright guys, so we are in the car. It is up to temp. You can see the coolant is still in the funnel up there. We got the door open for safety. It is a nice 45 degrees in here. Water temperature is at 172 right now, so the thermostat is open. So now let's do our rev procedure per Mazda. We're going to rev the car up to 3,500 RPMs, and we are going to leave it there for 3 to 5 minutes. We're going to bring the car down to idle for 2 minutes. Then we are going to bring the car back up to 4,500 RPMs for 2 to 3 minutes. Back down to idle for 2 to 3 minutes. And then lastly, back up to 3,500 for 2 to 3 minutes. And then back down to idle. I'm a tidbit nipply, so I'm still going to turn my heat on because I've got heat in this car still. Woo! So let's just sit here with my foot on the gas for an incredibly long amount of time, which is going to be incredibly boring. When you let off the gas and you go back to idle, you want to make sure that you look at the fluid and make sure that no bubbles are coming out. You're going to keep repeating this procedure until no bubbles come out. Alright guys, so now the car's back on the ground. Coolant at a time to cool off a little bit. And we've got fluid in there. If you don't care, you can just lift it up. Fluid's going to go everywhere. But I actually need to use some of this fluid and put it in my reservoir. So, we're going to play doctor. 500 milliliter syringe. We're going to remove our reservoir cap. And we are going to siphon the fluid from the funnel and pour it into our reservoir. Now remove your funnel, and you can remove the adapter and the rings as well. I just store these in the funnel. Make sure to get all your rubber pieces out of here. Oh, that's a little warm still. All right. Now, lastly, if your fluid level in the filler is a little bit lower than the cap, take some of your extra fluid and add it so that way there's a nice little bit of fluid in here in the ring before you put your cap on. Alright guys, so thank you for joining me for another episode of Shop Talk. Hopefully this helped you with what you're working on. Your application might be a little bit different, but if you're in a situation like me where you've got to do this a couple times a year just because of geographically where you live for tracks, organizations, stuff like that, you know, hopefully this kind of helped you out. Additionally, this is the way I do it. Some people will do a pressure bleeder. You can get one of those from Harbor Freight. I've never personally used one. Curious, maybe it'll be better, maybe it won't. You know, maybe I'll pick one up next year. But also, if you guys saw anything that, you know, maybe you thought something could have gone a little bit better, this is just the way I've always done it. It's worked eventually for me so far. So if you have any recommendations, questions, anything you want to know, you know, please, if I did this wrong, let me know. Thanks for sticking with me today. I appreciate it. We'll see you next time.